I was on my way to the airport when I saw a homeless woman with a baby in the rain. I gave her the keys to my house, but when I came back, I was shocked with what I found. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. Sheets of water poured over the windshield as Michael gripped the steering wheel, squinting through the haze. Every wiper swipe barely cleared the glass before it was swallowed again by the storm. He was late. Not just for any flight, for the most important business trip of his life. A pitch in New York that could launch his career into the stratosphere. But now, even getting to O'Hare on time felt like a gamble. The streets were flooded with headlights and impatience, horns echoing off the wet asphalt. Michael drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, tapping out the rhythm of his anxiety. He'd run through his checklist 3 times already, presentation file backed up in 3 places, suit freshly pressed, hotel and car arrangements confirmed. Still, his gut was uneasy, though he blamed the rain and his tardiness. As he passed an underpass near Belmont Avenue, something caught his eye through the sheets of rain, just a flicker at first, like movement in the shadows. Instinctively, he slowed down. There, on the sidewalk under the bridge, sat a woman curled up on a pile of soaked blankets. Her shoulders were hunched, her head bowed against the cold. In her arms, barely visible, was a small bundle of fabric that moved. A baby. Michael's eyes shot to the dashboard clock. He had maybe 20 minutes before check-in closed, and at least 40 minutes of traffic ahead. This was Chicago in a thunderstorm. Everything was stacked against him. He hesitated. His fingers hovered over the blinker. But he didn't drive on. He pulled over. Water splashed up around his tires as he parked by the curb and grabbed his umbrella from the back seat. The cold hit him instantly as he stepped out, the wind slicing through his coat. He approached slowly, unsure of what to say, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said, kneeling beside her. His voice was calm but carried over the rain. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, her eyes wide and red. Her lips trembled, and she clutched the bundle tighter. The baby whimpered. She didn't answer at first, just stared at him like she wasn't sure he was real. Michael opened the umbrella wider, shielding them both. Up close, he could see her clothes were soaked through, hair plastered to her face, and her hands were shaking violently. "My name's Michael," he said, softer now. "Do you have anywhere to go?" She shook her head slowly, eyes dropping again. Her whole body was trembling, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, fear, maybe. Exhaustion. Defeat. He glanced at the baby. Tiny. Swaddled in a blanket that was more wet than warm. "Look, I know this is crazy," he said, words tumbling out. "But I can't leave you like this. Not with a baby. Not in this storm." She didn't react. Michael looked back toward his car, then up at the sky, then back at her. Something inside him twisted. He couldn't just walk away. "Here," he said, pulling out his wallet. He fumbled through the cards until he found the spare key to his condo. "Take this. It's safe. It's warm. There's food in the fridge, dry clothes in the laundry room. You can stay there. Just until I'm back." Now she looked at him, really looked. Her eyes were dark, unsure. She didn't ask why he was doing this. She just nodded, slowly, and reached out with a hand that barely had the strength to grip. "I'm Rachel," she whispered. Michael helped her up, supporting her as they walked to his car. The baby didn't cry again, just let out small, tired sighs. He drove them to his apartment, a quiet place on the north side, helped her inside, pointed out the essentials. Wrote a note with his contact info and flight details. He didn't ask questions. Didn't want to scare her off. "I'll be back in 5 days," he said, standing by the door, drenched from head to toe now. "You're safe here. Please, just rest." Rachel nodded again, clutching the baby to her chest. She didn't say much else. Michael closed the door behind him, ran back through the rain, and got into his car. As he drove off toward the airport, windshield wipers working overtime, he couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at his chest. Something about her eyes. Something about how she looked at him. And yet, as the lights of the city faded behind him, he tried to convince himself it was just empathy. Just a random act of kindness. But in the days to come, that decision, that moment in the rain, would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself, about his past, and about the people he chose to trust. He had no idea yet how deep the story would go. The terminal was crowded, buzzing with voices and movement, but Michael moved through it like a ghost. He checked his bag, cleared security, and boarded his flight all in a haze, the storm still echoing in his ears. Somewhere over Indiana, cruising 30,000 feet above the earth, he stared blankly at the clouds outside the window. For the first time in his life, he couldn't focus on the meeting ahead. His thoughts were trapped back in Chicago, inside his apartment, with Rachel and her baby. He didn't know what came over him. It was like his body had acted before his brain had time to object. Handing over the keys, offering his home to a complete stranger, it wasn't just out of character. It was reckless. But her face, the baby, the way she barely had the strength to speak, it had cut through his usual logic like a blade. Now, floating in the sky and miles from home, he was starting to wonder if he had made a mistake. At the hotel that night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. The presentation deck sat untouched on the desk. He'd gone over it a dozen times already during the week leading up to the trip, but now, he couldn't even bring himself to open the laptop. Every few minutes, he picked up his phone, tempted to call someone, the building manager maybe, or a neighbor, just to check in. But what would he even say? "Hi, I let a homeless woman and her baby stay in my condo while I flew to New York. Can you go spy on her for me?" He turned the screen off again and dropped the phone onto the pillow beside him. No. He couldn't do that. The next morning, during a pre-meeting breakfast with the firm's regional directors, he found himself distant, distracted. When asked about the weather in Chicago, he answered vaguely, eyes flicking to his phone on the table. No messages. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe that Rachel would reach out somehow. But she didn't have his number. He'd only left his email on the note, and even that had felt like too much at the time. Back in his hotel room that night, he did what he'd been trying to avoid. He opened the security app linked to the motion detectors and cameras in his condo. The system had sent no alerts. That should have calmed him, but it didn't. He scrolled back through the last 12 hours. Nothing but still images of his hallway. The kitchen. The front door. At least she was staying inside. On the second day of the trip, during a conference luncheon, he received a text from a number he didn't recognize. It was his neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Goldman, a retired schoolteacher with a habit of peeking through her peephole every time she heard a sound in the hallway. "Michael. I hope your trip is going well. Not to alarm you, but I've noticed some unusual activity in your unit. Different people coming and going. Everything okay?" He stared at the message for a long moment, unsure how to answer. Different people? That didn't make sense. Rachel had a baby. She didn't seem like the type to throw a party. Then again, what did he really know about her? "Thanks, Mrs. Goldman. I'll check in." Probably nothing. Just a friend house sitting. He set the phone down, but a strange tension had taken root in his chest. What if Rachel wasn't alone? What if he'd misread the whole situation? The thought made his skin prickle. Still, he forced himself to get through the next 2 days, client meetings, financial forecasts, closing pitches. He smiled when he had to, answered when prompted, but he wasn't really present. On the fourth night, the unease turned into something sharper. He was brushing his teeth when he heard the security app buzz. He ran to the bed, phone in hand, and tapped the notification. A motion alert from the kitchen camera. It took a few seconds to load. What appeared on screen made his blood run cold. It wasn't Rachel. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hoodie, stood in the middle of his kitchen, back to the camera. He was opening drawers, rifling through utensils like he owned the place. Michael froze, staring at the image. His brain screamed for an explanation. Maybe it was someone helping her? A cousin? A friend? But the way the man moved, confidently, carelessly, didn't feel right. He tapped to access older footage. Nothing. The log was empty. All videos from the past 3 days had been deleted. His hand shook slightly as he checked the system settings. The camera was still online, still streaming, but the archive had been manually wiped. Someone knew what they were doing. Or at least, knew how to erase their presence. The next hour was a blur. Michael called the airline and changed his return ticket. The earliest flight was early the next morning. He didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, watching the live feed from his condo, but no one came into view again. Just an empty hallway. A dark kitchen. The occasional creak from the radiator. He arrived in Chicago by mid-afternoon. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy, as if holding back more. The taxi pulled up to his building and he climbed out with a pit in his stomach. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home early. Part of him didn't want to believe this was anything serious. The other part was already preparing for the worst. He entered the building quickly, nodded to the doorman, and took the elevator up to the 5th floor. As the doors slid open, he stepped into the familiar hallway and stopped. There was something tucked beneath his doormat. He bent down and pulled it out, a folded piece of lined paper with his name written in careful cursive. Michael. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Michael. I hope you understand why I couldn't stay. Thank you for what you did. You gave me more than shelter, you gave me a way to believe in people again. But I had to do something you might not understand. I'm sorry if this causes you trouble. I couldn't risk staying longer. If you ever hear the name Lucas, know that none of this was by chance. Thank you for everything. Rachel. Lucas? Michael stood in the hallway, staring at the note, heart racing. He knew that name. Everyone in his family did. But it wasn't a name he'd heard in years. He looked up at his door. Everything looked normal from the outside. He turned the key and stepped inside. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The apartment was not how he left it. Michael closed the door behind him slowly, scanning the apartment with careful eyes. The scent hit him first, faint but unfamiliar. Not bad, not foul, but lived in, like someone else's presence had soaked into the air. He took a cautious step forward. The lights were off, and the late afternoon gloom filled the rooms with a gray, uneasy silence. Everything looked rearranged. The rug in the living room had been rotated slightly. The books on the shelf weren't in their usual order. His mail, which he always left stacked neatly on the kitchen counter, was now scattered in a shallow bowl near the door. In the kitchen, a mug sat in the sink, stained with dried tea, and next to it, a pacifier. He moved through the apartment slowly, not touching anything yet, only observing. In the bathroom, a small pink towel hung over the side of the tub, and the trash had been emptied, but not recently. He could see the corner of a crumpled diaper poking from beneath some tissues. The place didn't look ransacked. It looked inhabited. As if someone had lived there carefully, intentionally, and then left in a hurry. Rachel's note replayed in his mind, especially the part about Lucas. That name, more than anything else, had shaken him. And it had stirred something inside him that he'd buried long ago. He sat on the edge of the couch and pulled out his phone. His hands were steadier now, his mind clearer, but the questions were multiplying. He called the building's front desk. Hi, this is Michael Harrow, in Unit 504. I was away for a few days and just got back. Did anyone come by to check in with security? A woman, maybe with a baby? The man on the other end sounded distracted. I'm not sure. Let me check the log. Yes, looks like we let someone up on Saturday. She had your spare key and ID. Said she was house sitting. Is there a problem? No, not exactly, Michael said, forcing calm into his voice. Thanks. He hung up and stared at the wall across from him. The thought that disturbed him wasn't just that Rachel had left, it was the possibility that someone else had come after her. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. 3 short raps. Precise. Michael stood up slowly. When he opened it, a woman in her late 50s stood on the threshold. She had sharp eyes, graying hair pulled into a low bun, and wore a brown coat that looked 2 sizes too large for her small frame. She held a slim leather folder under one arm and gave a polite but firm smile. "Mr. Harrow?" she asked. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "I'm Claire Jensen. I'm a social worker assigned to Emily Carter. I believe you know her as Rachel." Michael stepped back automatically, surprised. "Come in." She entered with careful steps, her eyes scanning the apartment like someone trained to notice things most people miss. "I was hoping to speak with her," Claire said, setting her folder on the coffee table but not opening it. "She left this address as a safe contact location." "She's not here anymore," Michael said. "She left this note." He handed it to her, and she read it quickly, lips tightening slightly. "I see," she murmured. "That's unfortunate. She was supposed to check in with me 3 days ago. We've been trying to track her movements ever since." Michael leaned forward. "Can I ask what's going on?" "She showed up on the street with a baby in the middle of a storm. I gave her shelter, but I don't even know who she really is." Claire nodded, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke. "Emily Carter has been in our system for nearly 2 years. She fled an abusive partner, a man with a criminal history, including assault and stalking. We helped her relocate twice. The last time, she insisted on staying in Chicago because she had someone here." Michael felt his throat tighten. "Lucas?" Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know that name?" "He was my younger brother," Michael said. "He passed away 7 years ago." Claire paused. "Then that would explain it. Emily mentioned someone named Lucas. She said he helped her during a very dark time. That he understood her situation. I always assumed it was a caseworker. He used to volunteer at shelters," Michael added. Before the accident." Claire took a breath, folding the letter closed again. "Emily's trauma runs deep. But she's fiercely protective of her child. She was recently granted partial custody, only because her partner lost his legal rights. But there have been rumors that he's been trying to find her again." Michael stood up, pacing slowly. "That might explain the man I saw in my kitchen. There was a man on my security camera, not her." Claire turned to face him. "Do you have a screenshot?" Michael pulled up the app and showed her the paused frame. She leaned in and studied it. "That could be him," she said quietly. "His name is Andrew Locke. Former boyfriend, and the baby's biological father. Violent tendencies. We warned her he might try to re-establish contact." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Michael asked, exasperated. "We did," Claire said, her voice tight. "But he's careful. Never leaves a trace. And Emily refused to enter the witness protection program. She didn't want to disappear again. She wanted her child to have some kind of normal life." Michael sat down again, overwhelmed. His condo had become part of something much larger than he'd realized. Claire stood and closed her folder. "If she contacts you again, please let me know immediately. She's not in trouble, but we need to make sure the child is safe, and that Emily doesn't try to run again. If Andrew found her once, he can do it again." Michael nodded slowly. "Of course." After she left, the apartment felt even emptier. He walked into the guest room. The bed had been stripped, the sheets folded neatly. But something sat on the dresser, a photo in a small plastic frame. A baby boy, wrapped in a white blanket, and beside him, Lucas. Michael picked it up, breath-catching. The photo was old, faded, and slightly bent. Lucas was smiling, arm around a visibly pregnant Emily. He realized, then, that Rachel had never been just a stranger in the rain. She had known exactly whose door she was knocking on. Michael didn't sleep that night. After Claire left, he spent hours sitting at his dining table, the photo of Emily and Lucas propped in front of him like a puzzle missing too many pieces. He hadn't seen that photo before, and he knew why. It had never been in the family albums, never shown to anyone. Lucas must have kept it private. Perhaps, in those final months before the accident, there were entire chapters of his brother's life that Michael had never been allowed to see. And now, years later, a woman tied to those chapters had entered his home like a ghost from the past, not by accident, not by fate, but on purpose. That idea shook him more than the break-in, more than the camera footage. Emily knew exactly where she was going that night. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a message. But there was still the matter of the man, the intruder in the hoodie who had erased the security footage. And as the apartment remained quiet and still through the early morning hours, Michael couldn't shake the image of that broad back turned toward the camera, fingers rummaging through drawers, calm as if he belonged there. By 6 o'clock, after pacing for hours and downing 3 cups of coffee, he sat back at the table and opened his laptop. The footage from the kitchen camera had been wiped, but the app's cloud backup might still contain older snapshots or brief motion-activated clips. It would take time to retrieve. While waiting, he did what he hadn't dared to do in years. He opened his brother's old file folder. It had been tucked away in a storage bin in the hallway closet, sealed since the funeral. Inside were Lucas's college transcripts, volunteer certificates, and a series of letters addressed to shelters around the city, offering support and availability. Michael flipped through them until he found one addressed to a women's outreach center on the south side, the same shelter Claire had mentioned. And then, something fell from between the pages. It was another photo, smaller than the first. This time, it showed Lucas holding a tray of food, smiling beside a group of women and children during a holiday event. At the edge of the photo, half hidden in the crowd, Michael recognized Emily's face. Younger, thinner, but unmistakable. She wasn't just a passing stranger in Lucas's life. She had been part of his work. And perhaps something more. The app pinged. The recovery tool had finished compiling the most recent metadata from the cloud. Michael clicked through, scanning motion events. Most were from days ago, Rachel moving through the hallway, the baby crying in the living room. But then, late on the third night of his trip, there was a clip. It was silent. Grainy. Only 5 seconds long. A figure entered the frame, not Rachel, but the same man from before. He moved directly toward the cabinet under the sink, opened it, and pulled out a screwdriver. Then he turned to the camera and stared directly into the lens. Michael's skin prickled. The man smiled. A subtle, deliberate smirk. Then he reached up and covered the lens. Michael froze the frame and zoomed in on the man's face. It wasn't crystal clear, but the features were sharp enough, a defined jawline, dark stubble, and a thin scar running from the base of his left ear to his collarbone. He copied the image and sent it to Claire with a short message. "Does this match Andrew Locke?" Seconds later, a typing indicator appeared. "Yes." "Where did you get this?" Michael didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the paused frame. The man hadn't been stealing. He hadn't looked frantic or hurried. He looked calm. Intentional. And most disturbingly, he knew about the camera. Someone had told him. Michael picked up his phone and called Claire. "He's been here," he said as soon as she answered. "In my kitchen." He disabled the cameras and deleted the files. But the cloud backup caught him, for a few seconds. Claire exhaled audibly. "You're certain it's him? I just sent you the image." He looked straight into the lens. Like he wanted me to know. There was silence on the other end. "Michael," Claire said finally, "you need to leave your apartment. At least temporarily. If Andrew knows where you live, and that Emily was here, he could come back. And next time, he might not be alone." "I'm not leaving," Michael said, almost without thinking. Why not? He hesitated. The reasons rushed forward, but only one felt true. Because Lucas would have stayed. Claire said nothing at first. Then her voice softened. Your brother was brave. But that doesn't mean you have to take the same risks. We're trying to protect Emily and the baby. That includes protecting you. I understand, Michael said. But if Emily trusted me enough to come here, I need to see this through. There was another long pause. Then Claire said, I'm sending you an officer's contact. A detective assigned to Emily's previous case. His name is Devin Ross. Share the footage with him. He'll open an investigation. I'll call him, Michael agreed. But Claire, does Emily know Andrew came here? I don't think so. She's not answering calls, and her phone location last pinged 2 days ago near Union Station. If she's on the move again, she's doing it without backup. Michael ended the call and copied the video to a secure drive. As he prepared to contact Detective Ross, he couldn't help but look again at the smirking face on the screen. Something in that expression gnawed at him. It wasn't the look of a man who had just broken in. It was the look of someone delivering a message. Later that afternoon, as the wind picked up and the sky darkened again, Michael received a phone call from an unknown number. He answered on the second ring. Michael Harrow? A male voice asked. Yes. Who is this? This is Detective Ross. Claire Jensen forwarded me the video. We need to talk. Where are you right now? At home. I'd recommend you don't stay there tonight, Ross said immediately. That man, Andrew Locke, is known to use intimidation tactics. The smile to the camera? That's a signature move. He's done it before. He wants you to know he's close. Michael felt his chest tighten. Do you think he's after me? No, Ross said. He's after her. But if he believes you're protecting her, you become a threat. Michael stood and walked to the window. Across the street, a white sedan was idling by the curb. You should pack a bag, Ross continued. I'll have someone meet you. And Michael, if you hear from Emily again, do not try to handle it alone. We believe she may still be in danger. And now, you might be too. Michael hung up slowly, eyes fixed on the car across the street. The passenger window rolled down, just a crack. Inside, someone was watching. He stepped back from the window. This was no longer about offering shelter to a stranger. It was about surviving what came next. Michael did not pack. He stood in the middle of his living room for several minutes after ending the call with Detective Ross, mind churning through options, impulses, doubts. The car across the street had since driven away, but its presence lingered in his mind like smoke. That window, half lowered. That slow, deliberate exit. Whoever was inside hadn't acted. Not yet. But their message was clear. Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave. It wasn't just stubbornness anymore, it was something else, a deep sense that this place, his place, was part of a puzzle only he could piece together. If Emily had chosen this apartment, left behind clues, and now disappeared again, then Michael felt obligated to stay in the middle of it. To understand what she had really come for. The apartment was quiet. The lights were dim. He moved from room to room with the attention of someone searching not for something specific, but for something out of place. And in the hallway, beneath the edge of a crooked floorboard he hadn't noticed until then, he found it. A second envelope. It was smaller than the first. No name on the outside this time. He opened it cautiously, half expecting another vague apology, but what he found was shorter, colder. A single sentence written in sharp, unsteady handwriting. Lucas said you'd understand. I had no choice. There was no signature, no date, nothing to indicate when it had been left. But it wasn't there when he first returned, he was sure of it. Which meant Rachel had either come back since his arrival or someone else had left it, pretending to be her. He stared at the note, his mind splitting into questions. What choice? What did Lucas know? And why did she keep insisting this wasn't random? The knock at the door startled him. This time it wasn't firm or official, just 2 light taps. When he opened it, he saw the last person he expected, Mrs. Goldman, his neighbor across the hall, clutching a thin robe around her small frame, eyes wide with concern. "I'm sorry to bother you, Michael," she said, voice lowered, "but there's something you should see." He followed her into her apartment, which was nearly identical to his but decorated in floral wallpaper and old family portraits. She led him to her front-facing window and pointed across the street. There was a man sitting out there for over an hour. "He just left a few minutes ago. But before he did, I saw someone come up to your door and slip something under the mat. I didn't want to interfere, but that's not normal, dear." Michael nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Goldman. Did you see who it was?" She hesitated. "I couldn't see the face. But they were small. Thin. Could have been a woman. Wearing a hood. Walked like she was injured, favoring the left side." That detail snapped into place. Rachel had limped slightly the night he picked her up. He hadn't noticed it much at the time, but now it felt important. He thanked her again, returned to his apartment, and checked beneath the mat. This time, there was nothing. But the hallway light flickered once, then went dark. Michael's heart began to race. He reached for his phone, opened the camera app, and used the flashlight feature to scan the hallway. Nothing. Just shadows and silence. But when he turned back to close the door, he saw it. Someone had taped a folded paper to the outside of his door. Barely noticeable in the dim light. He tore it down, closed the door behind him, and opened it. It was a page from a child's medical report, a printed hospital form, recently dated. The name on the top made his blood turn cold. Carter, Emily, guardian, Harrow, Lucas. Beneath that, in smaller font, another name, Carter, baby, pending legal review. And further down, in the notes section, guardian deceased. Temporary transfer pending. Next of kin unknown. Michael sat down hard in the nearest chair. The page trembled in his fingers. Lucas had been named as guardian. Not just a friend. Not just a volunteer. He was legally involved. The baby, her baby, had once been intended to live with him. But Lucas was gone. Which meant Emily had been alone in a legal storm for years, probably fighting every step of the way just to keep her child safe. No wonder she had run. No wonder she had shown up at Michael's door. Maybe she wasn't just looking for help. Maybe she thought Michael could finish what Lucas started. He dialed Claire again. She answered quickly. "Michael? I found a medical form. Dated last month. It lists Lucas as the legal guardian of Emily's baby." Claire went silent. Then, carefully, she said, "That shouldn't be possible. Lucas has been dead for over 7 years. "Then explain this," he said, reading the contents of the form. "It's an official hospital document. Someone processed it." Claire cursed under her breath. "Do you still have it?" "I do. I'm coming back. Right now. Don't leave the apartment. Don't talk to anyone." Michael hung up, pacing again, heart pounding. How had Lucas been listed on a document so recent? Either someone in the system had used his name illegally, or, and this thought chilled him, Emily had forged it to buy time. To keep custody. To make her claim stronger. But forging a dead man's guardianship? That was beyond desperate. That was dangerous. The doorbell rang. Michael froze. Too soon for Claire. He approached the door quietly, looked through the peephole. This time, it wasn't someone hiding. It was a man. Mid-30s. Dark hair. Dressed in plain clothes. Holding a folder and a badge. Michael opened the door an inch, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" "Michael Harrow," the man asked, tone calm. "Detective Devin Ross. I believe you've been expecting me." Michael opened the door fully and let him in. Ross walked in with the presence of someone who had done this 100 times. He looked around briefly, then took a seat on the couch without invitation. "Claire briefed me," he said. "But I need to hear it from you. Every detail." Michael sat across from him and told him everything: the storm, Rachel's condition, the keys, the footage, the man in the hoodie, the letter, the second envelope, the form, and now the new hospital document. Ross didn't interrupt once. Only nodded occasionally, taking quiet notes. When Michael finished, Ross finally asked, "Did Lucas ever mention Emily to you? Years ago, before the accident?" Michael shook his head. "Not once. But the photo she left, the one I found, they looked close. Like friends. Maybe more." Ross leaned forward. If Lucas was listed as guardian, even years ago, someone in the system might have used that connection to shield her. To delay custody rulings. It's possible Emily believed his name could still protect her. Especially if she was running from someone with power. Michael frowned. "You mean Andrew?" Ross nodded. "Andrew Locke isn't just violent. He's resourceful. Emily wasn't his first victim. But she might be the only one who got away with the baby. So what do we do?" Ross's eyes locked on his. "We find her before he does. That paper, the one with Lucas's name, could be enough to start a legal inquiry. But it also means she's out of time. If Andrew knows she used a dead man's name to delay custody, he'll exploit that." Michael stood. "Then we need to find her." Ross followed. "Agreed." Michael glanced one last time at the photo of Lucas and Emily. "She trusted him." Ross's voice was quiet. "Let's make sure that trust wasn't in vain." Detective Ross stayed for nearly an hour after their initial conversation, carefully examining the documents Michael had gathered, photographing the medical form and the letter, and making notes in his pocket-sized black notebook. He asked specific, pointed questions about the positioning of the cameras, the timestamps on the deleted footage, the format of the envelope paper, even the brand of the pen used in Rachel's final note. Michael could feel the energy in the room shifting. This was no longer a vague situation involving an impulsive act of kindness. It had evolved into something that could sit on the edge of criminal, legal, and deeply personal territory. The authorities were involved now, and Emily's escape had triggered something in multiple systems: health, legal, social, like a hidden mechanism finally responding to pressure. Before Ross left, he handed Michael a burner phone. "If she contacts you, on your personal phone, email, anything, forward everything to this. Don't engage her directly. Let us coordinate. We're not treating her as a suspect, but we can't afford another disappearance." "Not now." Michael nodded. The detective's tone was final. Controlled. Efficient. The city's safety net was preparing to close in, and Emily was caught inside it, whether she knew it or not. When the door closed behind Ross, silence fell over the apartment again. Michael felt the walls pulsing with secrets, like the space itself had absorbed every quiet confession and every hidden panic that had passed through it in the last few days. He turned in place, surveying the scene. The home he had returned to was not the same one he had left. And it wasn't just the scattered belongings or the faded scent of baby powder lingering in the air. It was the intentionality of it, the way each space had been touched, adjusted, adapted by someone trying to survive. He moved first into the guest room. It had been hastily prepared before his departure, just a spare blanket, fresh sheets, a basket with travel-sized toiletries. But now, the room looked completely different. A full crib stood against the far wall, newly assembled but clearly used. Inside, soft blankets, a tiny stuffed rabbit, and a pacifier identical to the one he found in the kitchen. On the dresser, a changing pad had been set up, with a neat row of diapers, wipes, and a bottle warmer. There was even a baby monitor set up and plugged in, but the camera unit was missing. Michael approached the closet. When he opened it, he found several baby onesies hung alongside women's clothing, nothing flashy or excessive, just practical. Winter coats. comfortable shoes. Even a sling carrier for the baby. It was a setup, not for a short stay, but for a plan. Rachel, or rather, Emily, hadn't simply hidden here. She had been preparing to live. He turned to the bedside table. A notebook lay open with a few handwritten pages, most of it lists, food needed, doctors' names, emergency contacts without full numbers, just first names. One line was different, though, underlined twice. Monitor routes to safe houses. Use Lucas's contacts if needed. Michael swallowed hard. Lucas's contacts. Her plan had always included that name. His brother's shadow loomed behind every object in this room. Moving into the master bedroom, Michael noticed another detail. The framed family photos that had always hung on the far wall had been removed. The nail hooks remained, but the pictures were gone. In their place, a corkboard had been leaned against the wall, likely hidden behind a standing mirror now moved aside. The board had multiple index cards pinned to it. All of them contained names, arrows, question marks, a crude but urgent mind map. At the center was the word, Andrew. Around it were smaller names, hospital staff, caseworkers, a few addresses, all incomplete. But one stood out. Millstone Shelter, Manager, Harold T. Michael recognized the name. It was the same shelter Lucas had corresponded with in his volunteer letters. And now Emily had circled it in red. He took a photo of the board and texted it to Ross. Found this in the bedroom. Seems like she was tracking people connected to her case. Also found a full nursery set up in the guest room. Ross replied almost instantly. That shelter was where she stayed last year before she disappeared the first time. Manager has connections to several safe house locations. I'll follow up. Michael moved next to the kitchen. He hadn't inspected it closely before, too rattled by the footage and the note. But now, he noticed changes there too. Some of the drawers had been reorganized, utensils sorted by size, sharp objects placed out of reach. A child lock had been half installed on the lower cabinet. On the refrigerator, a printed weekly calendar had been taped, dated from 2 weeks ago. Handwritten notes marked feeding times, nap schedules, and one phrase repeated every day at noon. Check window. Don't open if van is outside. Michael stared at that line. A van. Was that what she had seen? What she had been running from? He checked the trash again, more carefully this time. Beneath layers of everyday waste, he found a receipt from a nearby pharmacy. Emily had purchased baby formula, diapers, and cold medicine. But what drew his eye was the time, 2 hours before he received the camera alert. She had left after buying supplies. Maybe she had seen something, or someone, that forced her to leave earlier than planned. And the man on the footage came after. Michael stepped outside the apartment for a moment, into the hallway, needing fresh air despite the recycled air of the building. He looked down the hall, toward the stairwell. Then, on impulse, he walked toward the laundry room 2 doors down. Inside, under the folding table, something was tucked between the machine and the wall, a plastic grocery bag. He pulled it free. Inside was a small blanket, embroidered with the name Leo. The baby's name. His throat tightened. Emily had tried to erase every trace, but this had been left behind. He returned to his apartment and placed the blanket in the crib. For a moment, he stood silently, the weight of everything pressing down on his shoulders. He knew now that Emily hadn't fled randomly. She had planned. She had trusted. But something had gone wrong. Something, or someone, had forced her hand. And in her rush to disappear again, she had left behind pieces of a life she had fought to build. Ross's message buzzed on his phone. Need you to come down to the precinct tomorrow morning. Shelter manager willing to talk, but only in person. Think you should be there. Could be the key. Michael replied, I'll be there. As he looked around the transformed apartment one last time, he realized it wasn't just his home anymore. It had become a sanctuary. A battlefield. A journal of fear and hope written in clothing, pacifiers, corkboards, and notes. But it also held the silence of things unfinished. And Michael was no longer willing to let those things stay that way. Dawn found Michael standing at his kitchen counter, coffee untouched and growing cold, as he stared at the parking lot outside. The car that had loitered across the street the previous evening was gone, but the memory of that slid-open window and watchful eyes still pressed at him. He traced his fingers over the edge of the crib, the soft blanket bearing the name Leo, and wondered where Emily was right now, and whether she was safe. The city was awakening, and with it came urgency. He needed answers, and time wasn't his ally. He grabbed the bag he'd packed hastily the night before, a few essentials, his laptop, a charger, a spare hard drive, and headed downstairs, pockets rattling with papers, phone clutched firmly in one hand. His building felt alive this morning with neighbors carrying groceries, suitcases, travel mugs. In the elevator, someone gave a curt nod. Michael nodded back, but everything in him was focused on what lay ahead, the precinct. The detective station was on the near west side, a block from a nondescript strip of laundromats and diners. Michael was early. He stepped inside, finding the lobby mostly empty, save for a couple of worn chairs and a reception desk layered with paperwork and laminated notices. He leaned against a wall, watched the clock, and waited. When Detective Ross appeared, he looked slightly more relaxed than yesterday, counseled and purposeful. "There's a woman outside," he said, referring to the shelter manager, Harold T. He asked if Michael was ready. Michael nodded. Ross gave him a subtle nod in return, and they exited through the side door onto a quieter alley. A man stood waiting at the curb, Harold, guarding something more than his coat. He was middle-aged, firm, with an expression that said he'd seen too much but refused to walk away. Ross introduced them. Michael extended a hand. Harold accepted but didn't release quickly. His eyes slid to the second envelope, the corkboard photo, the pink onesie in Michael's bag. He wore an uncertainty that felt like a hinge between guilt and resolve. They walked to the station's interview rooms, tight, functional, sterile. Ross led the way. Michael watched as Harold sat across the table, hands folded, voice quiet at first. "I've read the file," he began, voice low and cautious. "Emily stayed at Millstone Shelter twice, in spring and then autumn. She dropped in without notice, never gave many details. Just a name, Lucas. Said she'd grown close to him. Shelter policy forbade intimacy, but she visited his volunteer events often. Food drives around the holidays." Michael nodded. "That's consistent with what I found in Lucas's things." Harold leaned forward. "She never told us much. But she came again recently, weeks before she turned up at your apartment. Said there was something going on, she couldn't stay at the location I had for her, and she seemed desperate." Ross interjected, "She left any notes? Did you notice anything off?" Harold cleared his throat. "Only this." He slid a thin envelope across the table toward them. Inside was a page, typed report from a caseworker she'd just encountered. It described her claiming that Lucas, despite being deceased, had put himself as legal guardian for her child. The caseworker balked and refused to sign off. Emily left, quietly, unannounced, and no one saw her again until she turned up in Chicago. Michael's chest clenched. That document's origin. She had tried before, not just recently. She had tried to make the legal system see Lucas alive. Ross exchanged glances with Michael. She must have been cornered. What other options did she have? But forging guardianship to delay proceedings, that's risky. Michael blinked back the sting in his throat. She believed it would protect her. That something Lucas stood for would matter. That's why she came to me. Harold nodded. She didn't stay long, he added. But she gave us that form, filed in a computer backup, but later removed. She wanted me to keep it. Said filing it would buy her time. And she knew I'd wait, hoping it would help her. Silence fell in the room. The buzz of fluorescent lights accompanied the stillness. Through the narrow window in the door, the busy station was alive, phones ringing, footsteps pacing, detectives bustling. Inside, time felt suspended, caught between hope and fear. Ross cleared his throat. "Harold, thank you. We need anything else you might recall, dates, descriptions, people who may have heard her. Anything, no matter how small, it helps." Harold nodded and stood. "Of course." He offered Michael a small card with his direct cell number, asking him to call if Emily contacts Harold. She said she might reach out, almost as a contingency. Ross walked Michael out, towards the precinct exit. Outside, they parted ways. Ross remained impassive, but Michael sensed urgency in the looming lines around his eyes. With a destination in mind, the shelter, Michael set out. The sky had changed. Late morning light gave way to gray, foreboding clouds. He caught a train west, then switched to a bus that crawled through streets flush with life. Vendors selling tamales, commuters threading between apartments. The city felt both indifferent and alive. He arrived at Millstone Shelter, a squat brick building sandwiched between a closed auto shop and a boarded-up convenience store. Faded letters spelled its name. Buttons for the door were scratched and worn. He rang twice. The door swung open, surprisingly quick. A different woman answered, younger, with tight posture, a hospital ID clipped to her coat. She looked at him carefully. "Can I help you?" Michael held up the card Harold gave him. "I'm Michael Harrow. I was referred. I'm looking for records, logs, anything related to Emily Carter. She stayed here. I need to know more." She blinked. "You're not a reporter." "Oh, no," he said quickly. "I'm someone she trusted. I just want to understand what she said, what she was doing. I found references, so much ties back to my brother." Concern softened her face. She invited him inside, into a hallway past a loud fluorescent corridor, shelves stacked with donated clothes. She disappeared for a moment and returned with a laptop folder. "Here's the intake log. Names, dates she signed in, some caseworker notes." She slid it across. Michael skimmed it, dates, scribbles, scared, escaped kids, call legal, another line, Lucas volunteer, asks for letterhead. His pulse flipped. She had typed, Lucas volunteer, referring to him. She was trying to channel his memory even months ago. He asked about Harold T. with trepidation. The woman's eyes filled with relief. He knew her. Tried to get hold of her again when he saw the ledger had been tampered. But she left shortly after. A quiet alarm sounded in his mind. She left multiple safety nets, each one unraveling quickly. And sheer ingenuity, using Lucas's name, connecting the shelter system, only to vanish again. They spoke longer. Michael's heart pounded between urgency and grief. Emily's trail was evaporating. There was one final entry, a partial address scribbled by a staff member on the last page, a neighborhood on the south side. An apartment complex, whisper of safe house network, that's all it said. Michael thanked her, rising with a resolute weight. He left the shelter with more questions and less reassurance. Every strand of Emily's path had taken him further from the stability he once knew. But each clue, every letter, note, log, carved out a story he couldn't abandon. He stepped into the afternoon air, the clouds weeping again. But inside him, a quiet flame of purpose burned. He knew the next step. He needed to find Emily. And to do that, he would weave through whatever maze she had created, and perhaps, save the remnants of the legacy his brother began. The address Michael found scribbled in the intake log led him to a nondescript stretch of South Side residential blocks, where old brick buildings sat shoulder to shoulder, each weathered by time and Chicago wind. He took the bus most of the way, then walked the final 3 blocks. The neighborhood was quiet, not abandoned, but wary. Curtains twitched as he passed. Dogs barked from behind fences. A cold breeze carried the scent of burnt wood and something vaguely chemical, as if the buildings had stories they didn't want told. The apartment complex at the edge of the street had no name on the front. The buzzer panel was scratched and discolored. He tried several numbers, none of which answered, until he pressed one marked D. Ruiz, and a voice crackled through the speaker. Yes? Michael hesitated, then spoke into the grill. I'm looking for someone. Emily Carter. I think she stayed here recently. I'm not a cop. I'm not media. I'm just trying to make sure she's okay. A long pause. Then, come up. 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. The door buzzed. He stepped inside. The stairwell smelled of bleach and old wood. He climbed slowly, scanning each door until he reached 3B. The woman who opened the door was in her 40s, with deep-set eyes and arms folded over a faded hoodie. She didn't smile. Behind her, the apartment was dim, quiet, and warm. I'm Delia, she said flatly. She was here. Not anymore. Michael exhaled. When did she leave? 3 days ago. Middle of the night. Took the baby, left everything else. Did she say why? Delia leaned on the doorframe. Didn't need to. I saw him. The man watching the corner. Same one she showed me a photo of weeks ago. Tall, pale, scar under the ear. Michael's breath caught. Andrew. Delia nodded. She said if I ever saw him nearby, she'd leave immediately. Didn't even wake me. Just gone by morning. Michael stepped inside at her invitation. The apartment was modest, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, no television, and windows covered in dark cloth. Delia moved with the slow gravity of someone who had helped too many people and gotten burned more than once. She handed him a small canvas bag from under the table. She left this, she said. Said if someone came asking, and if they mentioned the name Lucas, to give it to them. That was her test. Michael unzipped the bag. Inside was a stack of folded papers, a USB drive, and a cloth-wrapped bundle containing a child's ID bracelet from a hospital, name tag Leo Carter. Michael held it for a moment, then set it aside and opened the top sheet of paper. It was a letter. Not addressed to him directly, but written as if to someone who might understand everything. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone again. Not by choice. Never by choice. I know what this looks like, a mother running, hiding, changing names, changing truths. But I swear to you, everything I've done is to protect him. Leo is all I have. And they were never going to let me keep him. Michael felt his jaw tighten. Delia stood silently nearby, watching him read. He turned the page. I tried the system. I did what they told me. Filed reports. Attended hearings. Complied. But none of it mattered because Andrew knows how to break things without leaving bruises. And people believe him because he knows how to speak in courtrooms and wear nice jackets. I used Lucas's name not to lie, but because he was the only one who ever saw me as a person, not a case file. He believed in me. And when he died, the only thing that kept me going was the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone else in his life might believe me too. Michael stopped reading. His throat was tight. He looked up at Delia. She trusted Lucas, he said. And she trusted me because of him. She did, Delia said. More than you know. Michael continued reading. I forged the guardianship once, yes. Not to trick anyone. I never used it to take money or commit fraud. I just needed time. Every day with Leo is borrowed, and I'm tired of borrowing. I want something real. I came back to Chicago because I thought the past might still protect us. But now I think the past is what's chasing us. If something happens to me, don't let them take him. He flipped the letter over. No signature. Just a smudge of ink at the bottom, like she'd pressed the pen there but couldn't bring herself to finish. Delia handed him the USB. I don't know what's on it. Maybe documents, videos. She said not to trust the cloud. Said everything can be hacked. Michael pocketed it, already imagining what might be on it, legal files, testimony, perhaps even recordings. She said she'd contact you again, Delia added. That if she had to disappear, she'd try to leave a trail only you would understand. Something private. Something Lucas told her once. Michael frowned. Like a code? She didn't say more than that. Michael's mind jumped back to the apartment, to the note that had said Lucas said you'd understand. The lines seemed more loaded now, purposeful. What could Lucas have shared with her that Michael might remember? Something only between the two of them? He returned home with the bag pressed against his chest the entire way. The train was noisy, crowded, but Michael heard none of it. By the time he reached his apartment, the city was soaked in dusk. He locked the door, closed the curtains, and plugged the USB into his laptop. It held several files. Some were documents, legal briefs, medical reports, restraining orders, all scanned and labeled chronologically. But there was one folder marked, for Michael. Inside was a single video. He clicked play. The footage was grainy. It looked like it had been recorded on an old phone, propped up against a wall. Emily sat in the frame, holding Leo, who was asleep in her arms. She looked thinner than she had before, paler. Her eyes were hollow but fierce. Michael, she said, I don't know if you'll ever see this. If you're watching it, I guess you're still looking for us. That's something Lucas would have done. She looked down at the baby. Her voice wavered but didn't break. I never meant to bring this to your door. But I had nowhere else to go. The system doesn't protect people like me. And Lucas, he once said something to me that I never forgot. He said, if the world tries to erase you, leave echoes loud enough that someone who loves you can find them again. That's what I've been trying to do. Michael sat frozen, the screen lighting his face. She looked straight into the camera. I don't need saving. I just need someone to hold space for us. To remember that we were here. That we mattered. That Leo wasn't just a footnote in a custody battle. The video ended. Michael sat for a long time in silence. The echo she had mentioned, he could hear it now. It was in the note, in the photo she left, in the items she didn't take. She had been leaving signs, not for the police, not for caseworkers, for him. To remember. To understand. To act. A knock shattered the stillness. He went to the door cautiously. Outside stood Claire Jensen, the social worker. Her expression was tight. Her hair was wet from the rain. I need to talk to you, she said. It's about Emily. We found something. Michael stepped aside, heart hammering. He knew now, with complete clarity, that whatever came next wouldn't just be about Emily. It would be about what she was willing to sacrifice to be invisible, and what he was willing to risk to make her seen again. Claire stepped in quickly, shedding her damp coat and glancing around the apartment like she already knew what she was walking into. Her eyes fell on the open laptop, the USB still plugged in, and the canvas bag resting on the couch beside it. You found it, she said softly. Michael nodded, still caught in the aftershock of Emily's video. She left it with a woman named Delia. South Side. Said she was leaving echoes. Something Lucas once told her. Claire didn't sit. She moved slowly to the crib, rested her hand on the edge, and sighed. She was always careful, always on the move. But even in hiding, she was trying to build something that felt permanent. That's rare. Michael leaned against the table, arms crossed, trying to stay grounded. You said you found something. What is it? Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal, the kind Lucas used to carry around. She set it gently on the table. One of our interns was digitizing old shelter records, she explained. She found this mislabeled in a box of outdated files from an outreach center that closed 3 years ago. Inside were old intake notes, some art from the children's program, and this. Michael stepped forward, fingers trembling slightly as he opened it. It was Lucas's handwriting. He flipped through pages filled with notes, daily reflections, quotes from residents, ideas for shelter reform. Then, about halfway through, he found the name, Emily. March 22, Spoke to EC again today. She's pregnant, terrified, hiding from someone. No details yet, but I believe her. She's not dramatic. She's exhausted. I offered to walk her through the legal process, connect her with someone. She hesitated but took my number. March 30th, Emily didn't come in yesterday. I worry. Left a message with Harold to keep an eye out. Her eyes, she's seen too much. But she smiled when she talked about the baby. She has hope. April 15th, she's back. Looks worse. Said she tried to file a police report, but her ex showed up at the station. How is that even possible? She's afraid they'll take the baby the moment it's born. I told her I'd help her apply for guardian status if needed. She cried. Michael paused. He knew everything. Even back then. Claire nodded. It gets more complicated. She turned to the last page, marked with a paperclip. April 28th, I told her I'd do it. If things get worse, I'll act as guardian. She was hesitant, didn't want to burden me. But I couldn't stand the thought of that child being taken by the system or worse, by him. I submitted the paperwork for temporary standby status. If anything happens to her, I'll be notified. Michael stared at the page, trying to reconcile the time stamp with everything he'd learned. Lucas must have filed that paperwork just weeks before his death. Which meant it had entered the system, maybe processed, maybe not, but it had existed, legally, for a brief window. And Emily had known. That's how she had his name on the hospital record. She wasn't lying, Michael murmured. She didn't forge anything. She used what was already real. Claire's voice dropped. There's a chance the record was archived. That it's still legally viable. We're checking now. Michael rubbed his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of it. So she's not just a woman running from a violent ex. She's someone who trusted the system once, and it failed her. And Lucas was the only one who actually did something. Claire hesitated before adding, there's more. She reached back into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, sealed with clear tape. She slid it across the table. It was inside the journal. Addressed to Emily. Unopened. Michael stared at the envelope. The handwriting was Lucas's. He picked it up, broke the seal carefully, and unfolded the letter inside. Emily. I don't know what will happen next. The world doesn't always treat people like you fairly, and I hate that. But if something goes wrong, if I'm not there when you need me, know that I meant it. You're not alone. Not anymore. Give the baby a name that matters. Let him grow up knowing he was worth protecting from the very beginning. And if the day comes when someone else needs to finish what I started, trust them. With all the strength I have left. Lucas. Michael read it twice, then folded it slowly, pressing his palm over the words. Claire finally sat down, watching him closely. He knew it might come to this. And Emily held on to that belief. She's been following his words like a map. Michael nodded. And she left it all with me. Hoping I'd understand. Claire hesitated. I need to ask you something, Michael. It's unofficial, off the record, but important. He looked up. If we find her, she said carefully, and she's still trying to avoid custody review, if there's a way to use Lucas's guardianship as a basis for transfer, would you be willing to step in? Michael didn't respond immediately. He looked around the room, at the traces Emily had left, at the photo still propped on the shelf showing Lucas with his arm around her, at the small crib with the name Leo stitched into the blanket. Not just legally, Claire added. Emotionally. This wouldn't be temporary. It wouldn't be easy. Michael's voice was steady. Yes. Claire exhaled, almost in relief. Then we move forward. He nodded again. I want to help. Not because Lucas would have done it, but because I know why he did. Before Claire left, she pulled out her phone and showed Michael a screenshot. It came from a downtown bus station, security feed from 12 hours ago. She bought a one-way ticket to a town about an hour north. She was with the baby. Alone. Michael leaned closer. The resolution was poor, but it was her. A scarf covered most of her face, but her posture, the sling around her shoulder, unmistakable. She's not running anymore, Claire said. She's relocating. That means she might be ready to talk. Michael nodded. Then tell me where. Claire hesitated only a moment before sliding him the information. Don't go alone. I won't, he lied. An hour later, Michael was driving north with the letter on the passenger seat and Leo's bracelet in his pocket. He didn't know what he would find when he got there: fear, distrust, anger. But he had something Emily might finally believe in. He had the truth. And this time, he wasn't going to let her walk away without knowing that she was no longer fighting alone. The town Emily had fled to was barely more than a cluster of neighborhoods stitched together by railroad tracks and old storefronts, the kind of place people passed through without remembering they had. Michael arrived just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun low and gentle behind a row of oaks lining the main road. The air was cleaner here, still, as if it hadn't yet learned to carry the weight of too many secrets. Claire's directions led him to a quiet street on the edge of town, where duplexes sat shoulder to shoulder with small, weathered homes. The address she gave him wasn't registered to Emily, of course it wouldn't be, but to a woman named Tasha Lynn, another name Michael didn't recognize but suspected belonged to someone in the same network that had taken her in before. He parked across the street, took a breath, and checked the rearview mirror. No one had followed him. He stepped out of the car slowly, hands visible, nerves steady. He didn't knock right away. The house had a small front porch with a chair and a children's tricycle resting beside a sagging wooden bench. Through the sheer curtain in the window, he saw movement. A figure. Watching. The door opened before he reached it. Emily stood in the doorway, Leo balanced on her hip. She didn't look surprised. Only tired. They stared at each other for a long moment before she stepped aside. You came, she said. Michael entered the house slowly. It was modest but warm. A smell of lentils and something baked lingered in the air. Toys were scattered in a corner. Leo, now almost a year old, looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. I told myself you wouldn't, she added, closing the door behind him. But I hoped you would. Michael swallowed. I didn't come to stop you. Or report you. I just needed to see you. To understand. She nodded, walked over to the couch, and sat down carefully, placing Leo beside her. The child looked healthy. Alert. He reached for a soft block and began chewing on the corner. Michael sat across from her. I found the letter Lucas wrote to you, he said. And the USB. And the journal. Emily's eyes flickered. You went deep. I had to. You trusted me with a story I didn't know how to carry. But now I think I do. She glanced at Leo, then back at Michael. So what do you want to know? Not what, he said. Who? Emily looked at him, unblinking. I used to be someone else. Before I ran. Before Lucas. I was the girl who followed rules, who studied, who worked a cashier job to make rent while finishing my degree. I met Andrew through mutual friends. He was charming. Funny. Older. I didn't see the trap. Michael listened without interrupting. By the time I realized who he was, I was pregnant. He didn't want the baby. Said it was leverage. That I'd never get away. I tried the shelters, the legal system, everything. But he always found me. Until I met Lucas. She took a shaky breath. He was different. Not because he fixed everything, he couldn't. But because he believed me. And when I said I was afraid of losing my baby, he didn't tell me to stay strong or document everything. He just asked what I needed. Michael leaned forward. That's who he was. All his life. He offered to file the guardianship, she continued. I told him no at first. I didn't want to tie him to this mess. But he did it anyway. Quietly. Not to take control, just to be a backup. Michael nodded. I saw the filing date. He died not long after. Emily lowered her gaze. And with him, every chance I thought I had. So I ran again. And again. Until I couldn't anymore. When I saw you that day on the street, I thought I was hallucinating. You look like him. You even speak like him. He gave a weak smile. We were close. I still hear him sometimes. Especially lately. There was silence for a moment. I never wanted to involve you, she said. But I needed someone Leo could be safe with. Someone who wouldn't ask me to prove I deserved to be his mother. You shouldn't have to prove that, Michael said. Not to me. Not anymore. She looked up, searching his face. Why are you here? Because I think I can help, he said. Claire found out the guardianship Lucas filed may still hold some legal weight. If it can be validated, I can step in as a legal intermediary. Help you get a proper hearing. Not one controlled by Andrew's lawyers. A real one. One that counts. Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through the weariness. And what happens after that? You come back, he said. On your terms. We file everything properly. You get a restraining order that actually sticks. And I testify, if needed. I have the footage. The logs. The letters. She sat back, processing everything. Leo reached for her hand, and she held it tightly. I'm not asking you to surrender anything, Michael added. You're his mother. But if I can carry some of this, even just for a while, I want to. Emily looked at her son, then back at Michael. You do that? After everything? I would, he said. Because Lucas would've. And because I finally understand why. She stood slowly, walked over to a small drawer near the kitchen, and returned with an envelope. Inside was Leo's birth certificate. She handed it to Michael. It's yours, she said. To file the claim. Michael took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The connection was quiet but full of meaning. They didn't speak for a long while after that. Later, as dusk turned to night, Emily made tea while Leo fell asleep on a pile of pillows. They sat together, side by side on the couch, watching the child breathe deeply. You know, Emily said softly, I used to think trust was the most dangerous thing I could offer someone. Now I think it might be the most powerful. Michael nodded. And maybe that's why Lucas did what he did. Because he trusted you enough to believe you could survive. She smiled faintly. Now we survive together. Michael stayed a few more hours, helping her write out the steps ahead, the names, the documents, the signatures. They had no guarantees. No promises. But they had a plan. And in a world where everything felt fragile, that was enough. Before he left, Emily placed Leo into his arms for the first time. The boy stirred, blinked once, then settled against Michael's chest. For the first time since Lucas's death, Michael felt something reconnect inside him, not a replacement, not a substitute, but an extension of everything that had come before. I think he knows, Emily whispered. Michael looked down at the child. I think he does too. The next morning began before the sun. Michael had driven back to Chicago through the night, the warmth of Leo's small body still etched into his memory like a permanent mark. His arms had ached to hand the boy back, not because of weight, but because of what that brief moment had meant, not just a connection to Lucas, but to something even more profound. A purpose that stretched beyond grief or guilt. When he reached his apartment, he didn't go inside. He sat in the car for nearly an hour, letting the city rise around him, watching light creep over the rooftops. Eventually, he dialed Claire. She answered before the second ring. She's safe, he said. And she's ready. Claire didn't ask for details. She simply said, good. Let's get to work. By noon, They were sitting in a small meeting room at a legal services nonprofit that worked in partnership with Claire's department. Papers were spread across the table: guardianship forms, affidavits, shelter reports, hospital documents, and, most critically, Lucas's original journal entry and standby filing. A junior attorney named Jasmine, no older than 27, flipped through each document with calm precision. "It's unusual," she said. "But not impossible. Because Lucas filed before his death, and because Emily has maintained consistent references to that guardianship, we might be able to use it as part of a continuity of care argument." Michael tapped the table gently. "And my role?" Jasmine looked at him. "You'd file as a successor guardian, using your familial relationship to Lucas as the foundation. If Emily agrees, and the court sees it as a way to stabilize custody, you'd be supporting her claim, not replacing it." Michael nodded slowly. "That's what I want. To support her." Claire added, "It also shows the system she's not alone anymore. And that's often enough to change the tone in family court." They spent hours combing through statements. Michael provided his security footage, the images of Andrew in his apartment, the photo of the note Rachel had left, and the USB drive. Everything was submitted. Jasmine prepared the formal petition, which would trigger a review hearing within 10 days. Before leaving, Michael asked the question that had been building inside him. "If Andrew tries to contest this?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "He can try. But given his history, if we act fast, we can get a temporary order that keeps him away until the hearing." Claire nodded. "We'll request an emergency protective ruling. And if he violates it, we move to criminal enforcement." The pieces were aligning, cautiously, precariously, but they were aligning. Later that evening, Michael returned to his apartment. He finally opened his windows again. The scent of rain from the night before still hung in the air. He stood at the edge of the guest room, staring at the crib. He hadn't moved it. Couldn't. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a promise, that someone had once felt safe enough to plan for a future here. He was reviewing documents at his dining table when his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. Then a voice, male, low, cold. "You think you're saving her? You're not." Michael froze. "Who is this?" "You know who it is," the voice said. "She's mine. She always was. You're just another idiot who thinks paperwork can keep her from me." Michael swallowed, blood rushing in his ears. "If you come near her again, I'll see to it you're buried in lawsuits and police reports." A quiet chuckle. "You sound like your brother." Michael's chest tightened. The line went dead. He stared at the phone, breathing hard. The fear was real, but so was the resolve. This wasn't just a custody battle. This was a hunt. And Emily had been the prey for far too long. He immediately forwarded the call log to Claire and Jasmine, then to Detective Ross. Within 10 minutes, Claire called back. "We have enough," she said. "We can file for the emergency order tonight." Michael's voice was still shaky. "He knows. He's watching. And now we're watching back." That night, Michael stayed awake, watching footage from his security cameras. There was no sign of Andrew, but he no longer trusted what the eye could see. He knew now that men like Andrew didn't always break in through doors. Sometimes, they used fear to fracture a person's entire life. But Emily wasn't fractured anymore. She had rebuilt, piece by piece, and now Michael was part of that structure. 3 days later, the emergency hearing was granted. Michael sat beside Emily in a narrow courtroom, fluorescent lights humming above them. Leo sat in her lap, dressed in a pale blue hoodie, eyes scanning the space with innocent confusion. The judge, a woman in her 60s with the no-nonsense air of someone who'd seen too many cases like this, reviewed the documentation in silence for nearly 15 minutes. Claire sat behind them. Jasmine stood at the front, delivering her argument with quiet authority. She referenced Lucas's filing, Michael's successor claim, the footage, and the threats. Emily said very little. She didn't have to. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was measured but firm. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Harrow, your request for temporary co-guardianship is approved, pending full review. A protective order is now in place. The child is not to be removed from your joint care without court supervision. Mr. Locke is hereby forbidden from contacting or approaching either party." Emily closed her eyes, just for a moment. Michael saw her shoulders lift, then fall. After court, as they stood on the courthouse steps, Emily looked at Michael. "I never thought I'd stand here again. Not like this." "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore." She nodded, her eyes misting. Then she reached into her coat and handed him a folded letter. "I found this in my old things. It's from Lucas. I'd forgotten I still had it." Michael unfolded it. This one wasn't about guardianship, or fear, or legal advice. It was personal. "Emily. If you ever feel like you're failing, remember, survival is not failure. It's strength. And if you're reading this years from now, with a child in your arms and no map to guide you, know that I believed in you. Not because of what you do, but because of who you already were. And maybe, if the world is kind, someone else will believe too." Michael folded the letter carefully and looked at her. "I do," he said quietly. Leo reached for Michael's hand. The child's grip was small but steady. And in that moment, Michael knew the circle wasn't closing. It was opening. The news of the protective order brought a wave of cautious optimism, but Michael knew better than to mistake court documents for true safety. Paper could be torn. Orders could be ignored. And men like Andrew didn't vanish because a judge told them to. Still, something had shifted in Emily's posture, and even in Leo's eyes, the exhaustion no longer swallowed every expression. They weren't safe yet, but they were no longer on the run. That, in itself, was a beginning. The following week unfolded like a quiet rebuilding. Emily and Leo moved temporarily into a transitional apartment managed by a local nonprofit. Michael visited often, helping with paperwork, picking up groceries, offering rides to doctor appointments. He didn't hover, he was learning that true support didn't smother, it stood steady. One afternoon, while Leo napped and sunlight spilled across the small dining table, Emily slid a folder across to Michael. "I want you to see this," she said. Inside were more than a dozen pages, notes, sketches, even architectural mock-ups. It was a plan, handwritten and drawn by Emily herself. A safe house model, small scale, designed specifically for single mothers with children under 5. It wasn't just shelter. It was community. "I've been sketching this for years," she said. "But I never thought it could actually happen." Michael flipped through each page, stunned by the detail. "Where did you even learn how to design something like this?" She shrugged. "I used to study social work. Dropped out when I had to disappear. But the dream stayed." Michael closed the folder gently. "You were trying to build what you needed. That's how change happens." "I still want it," she said quietly. "Not just for me. For all the women who disappeared like I almost did." He looked at her, and for the first time, saw not the woman who had appeared in the rain holding a crying baby, but someone standing on the edge of a new beginning, not unbroken, but unbent. That night, Michael sat in his apartment, the folder still on his lap, and felt the weight of possibility. He had spent most of his adult life calculating financial projections, building systems for investors and clients. And yet, the most meaningful numbers now danced in his head: beds, meals, days of safety, names on a waiting list that hadn't even been written yet. By the following morning, he had already scheduled a meeting with an old contact from a local nonprofit that supported at-risk families. By the end of the week, he had connected with a foundation that specialized in microgrants for community housing. Within 10 days, he had created a legal framework, funding proposal, and location feasibility report for a pilot shelter, co-designed by Emily. They called it the Echo House. Inspired by Lucas's words. Michael offered his home as the starting location. He moved into a smaller rental, allowing the apartment to be restructured into a transitional space for one family at a time, while the larger project unfolded. The idea was simple: one place, one bed, one woman at a time. But each life it touched would create a ripple. When the first mother arrived, a 19-year-old with a newborn and a trauma history Emily recognized immediately, they stood together at the door, watching her step inside. Emily held Leo in her arms and looked up at Michael. "This is what I needed. Years ago. Just one door that stayed open." "You built it," he said. "No," she replied. "We did." Claire helped file the final organizational paperwork. Jasmine volunteered legal hours to help structure intake guidelines. Delia, the woman who once sheltered Emily, offered to serve as an aftercare liaison. Lucas's journal was framed on the entryway wall, his words etched into the plaque beneath it. Sometimes survival is not about escaping. It's about planting something behind you strong enough to outlive the storm. The media never found out about the Echo House, not in any dramatic way. That was intentional. No big press releases. No ribbon cuttings. Just quiet work. Privacy. Protection. Impact. Michael continued working remotely, but most of his hours became tied to the shelter. He handled financials, coordinated donations, and managed building permits. Emily ran the human side. Intake interviews, support plans, child care. She never called herself a director. But everyone else did. And Leo grew. He walked. He talked. He called Michael by his name, then one day, completely unprompted, called him Uncle. Michael had to step outside after that. Just for a few minutes. The air was sharp. He let himself cry. By the end of that first year, they had assisted 9 women. By the end of the second, they had secured zoning for a second building. What began as a desperate choice in a rainstorm had become a lifeline for others. And Michael, who once measured his days by scheduled flights and earnings reports, now measured them by the warmth of laughter through walls, the soft shuffling of baby feet across hardwood floors, and the strength of a woman who had once appeared like a ghost in the night and instead became the architect of something enduring. On the 1-year anniversary of the Echo House's founding, Michael arrived early with a box of printed letters, personal notes from each resident who had passed through in that time. Emily read each one aloud in the common room. There were tears, laughter, silence. Then applause. Later that night, when the lights were dim and the last of the guests had left, Emily handed Michael another letter. "This came in the mail today," she said. "No return address." Michael unfolded it. Inside was a short note, handwritten in blocky script. "You built something real. I can't fight that anymore. I'm leaving. Let her live." No signature. But they both knew who it was from. Michael burned the letter that night in the kitchen sink. Not out of fear. But because it no longer mattered. What mattered was that the house stood. The lights stayed on. And tomorrow, another woman would walk through the door and find a place where echoes became roots. The third winter came softly. Snow blanketed the city with a kind of hushed reverence, muting traffic, slowing life. Michael stood in the entryway of the second Echo House, watching his breath form clouds as he held the door for a mother carrying her daughter through the threshold. The girl wore mismatched mittens and gripped a plush rabbit so tightly it seemed strained. Emily greeted them inside, her voice gentle and clear, a warmth that had become synonymous with sanctuary. Michael stepped back out into the cold, let the door close quietly behind him, and exhaled. He never imagined his life would circle this far from its starting point. That a single moment, pulling over on a rain-slicked road 3 years earlier, would echo so loudly, for so long. But it had. And what it left behind was something deeper than success. It was legacy, though not his alone. Back at his apartment, no longer a temporary place but still quiet and familiar, Michael sifted through the week's mail, most of it bills and newsletters from nonprofits. Near the bottom of the stack was a small envelope with no stamp, just his name handwritten in blue ink. He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. Michael, I don't know if I'll ever be able to say this properly, so I'm writing it instead. You didn't just open a door for me that day. You changed the way I saw the world. You took a risk not just with your home, but with your heart. And that gave me the strength to stop running. Leo is thriving. He's funny. He's sharp. He asks about you all the time, calls you the man with magic pockets because you always have snacks or stories hidden in them. More than once, I've thought about where we'd be if you hadn't stopped that day. The truth is, I don't think we'd be anywhere. And that's not dramatic. It's just real. But because of you, because of Lucas, because of what the two of you shared, we're here. And now other families are here too. You didn't just save us. You saved a blueprint. You saved an idea. You saved the memory of someone we both loved. I hope he's proud. I think he is. With gratitude I can't measure. Emily. Michael sat with the letter for a long time. Outside, snow fell thicker now, coating rooftops and empty sidewalks. He read it again. And again. Then he stood, crossed to the small bookshelf in the corner, and reached for a worn notebook, Lucas's journal. He opened it to the page that had begun all of this, where Lucas had written, "If something happens to her, I'll be the one who answers. No matter what." Michael added his own note in the margin, just beneath that sentence. "You were. And now I am." Later that week, he attended the first planning session for the third Echo House, this one on the west side, in a converted church building. It would take months of permits, grants, and gutting. But they had volunteers. They had purpose. And more importantly, they had momentum. Emily led the meeting. She carried herself with the ease of someone no longer defined by escape, but by creation. Leo sat quietly in a corner, scribbling on a notepad, humming to himself. At the end of the session, Emily pulled out a small gift box and handed it to Michael. "I've been waiting for the right time," she said. Inside was a photograph, one he hadn't seen before. It was Lucas, smiling wide, standing between Emily and a group of women at one of the earliest shelter events. His hand rested gently on her shoulder, and she was mid-laugh, clearly unaware the camera had caught them. "Found it in one of the old storage drives," she explained. "Thought it belonged to both of us now." Michael swallowed hard. "It does." There was silence. "Comfortable now?" "Earned." After the meeting, they walked together to the car, snow crunching under their boots. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Emily asked. "All the time," Michael replied. "But then I remember, they didn't go differently. This is the version we got. And I wouldn't trade it." She nodded. "Neither would I." Before they parted ways, Leo ran up to Michael and tugged at his coat. "Uncle Michael," he said, "are you coming back tomorrow?" Michael knelt to meet his eyes. "I'll be back every time." He meant it. Weeks passed. Then months. The third house opened its doors on a rainy spring morning, almost poetic in its symmetry. Michael gave a short speech at the opening, but it wasn't rehearsed. It didn't need to be. "This house," he said, "isn't about saving anyone. It's about believing that people are worth saving. About listening before judging. About slowing down when your instincts tell you to keep going." That's all I did, once. I stopped. And I've been moving differently ever since. The crowd, small, quiet, but deeply connected, applauded gently. Emily stood at the back, Leo balanced on her hip. They shared a look. That unspoken bond that had been forged not in comfort, but in fire. That evening, back at home, Michael received another envelope. This one bore no handwriting. It was typed, clean, impersonal. Inside was a final court order, permanent shared guardianship between Emily Carter and Michael Harrow, formalized under a new legal provision inspired by their case. It wasn't just official. It was precedent. He placed the document next to Lucas's journal. Then, with the sun falling low beyond the skyline, he stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched endlessly ahead, its noise, its chaos, its pulse. And yet, for the first time in a long time, it felt quiet. And from that stillness, he heard the echo. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. Of lives saved, legacies honored, and the simple, immeasurable power of stopping in the rain.